Please find in your Bibles Genesis chapter 16. Many years ago at the church where I served as a youth pastor, they planned an outing, a road trip. We'll take the bus, they said. It'll be fun, they said. We'll fellowship together. It's fall foliage time in Vermont, and so we're going to travel across Vermont and we're going to see the foliage. And they gave the keys to the bus captain. His name was Butch. Do you know anybody named Butch? Well, he was the epitome of Butch, the bus captain. And so Butch says, hey, we're going to take back roads because, follow the logic here, you never know what you're going to run into on an interstate. So we toured all kinds of small towns in Vermont, everyone a postcard, everyone 30 miles an hour, until we got to the one town that was having a parade. So think of General Pleasanton days, you think of Arts and Crafts Parade. So not only did we get a road trip with friends that we love, not only did we tour a great museum that day, but we saw a parade in some random town. Not sure what the occasion was, because you just never know what you're going to run into on those interstates. Have you ever taken maybe you've been with somebody, I'm sure you've never done this. You have never taken a shortcut that turned out to be the long way around. But you've been with people that do. They're like, I know the plan. I got this shortcut. Nobody knows it. It's top secret. And you go that way and it's like road construction. It's dead ends. And you've had some of those. You find yourself watching some kind of parade of some sort. Now, I'm old enough to remember when turning right on red became a thing. And if you were old enough to remember that, when you started turning right on red, it's like you were a ninja sneaking in and out of somewhere. Nobody could stop you. And it was like you look around and you just go right through a red light. It's kind of this secret shortcut that only certain people know, except it's now the law and everybody can do it. But there's great temptation in our journeys. We're talking about Abraham and Journey of Faith. That's our series. And there's great temptation when we're looking at the journey of faith to look for shortcuts. And there's no hurry up to character building. There's no shortcut to faith and trust. When God's seeking to build character into your life, He does it slowly over time. There's not any shortcut to that, but we're always busy looking for shortcuts, wishing we could turn right on red. And far too many of us have found ourselves delayed by some parade of craziness that we never expected because we thought we were taking the fast way to character, the fast way to happiness. So in our series today, we're coming to Abraham and chapter 16. And what we're going to do is we're going to find his attempt, him and his wife Sarah, and their attempt at a shortcut. But actually their attempt at a shortcut brought an entire parade of problems that persisted for centuries, actually. So quick review. God called a man named Abram. I'm using Abram and Abraham the same, but God will change his name at some point from Abram to Abraham. His wife is Sarai. At some point, God changes it to Sarah, and we'll cover that. God called them in Genesis 12, and He said, you are to leave where you are, and you start going to a land I'll tell you about when you get there. And so he's like, he believed God, and he started going, and when he arrived, God made two promises to him. He made the promise of genealogy. Your family will be important and a great nation. And through your family line, the Messiah would be born. And then geography as well. And that is a land. You will be given a land, a very specific geographical location that Israel occupies to this day. Now, Abraham and his wife, Sarah, were pushed to trust God in many ways. And in particular, they were well beyond reasonable childbearing years. They had no children, and God said, you will I will bring through you a great nation. Almost everywhere they went, they would stop and build an altar, and he would worship God. Last week we saw about an altar, and it was a blood covenant that was explained to us from Caleb, and that there were two pieces. And in typical covenant, the two parties would walk together between the pieces. And they would say, let it be done to me, what's happened here to these animals, if I fail my end of the bargain. But in a powerful visual, God himself walked unilaterally through the pieces. And he said, if I fail to live up to my part of the covenant, I'll take the hit. And then God said, because of that unilateral walking between the pieces, he said, if you fail to live up to your part of it, I'll take the hit. And that's exactly what happened when Jesus was spread wide on the cross. He took the hit for our failure to live up to the covenant between humanity and God. So now we come to chapter 16. It's been 10 more years, and there's still no child, no son that's come to Abraham and Sarah. And so we're going to see them waiting and then scheming. So look at verse 1. We're going to walk through this a few verses at a time to track with the narrative. Verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. We'll pause right there. Abraham's 85 years old. His wife Sarah is 75 years old. God promised a son, but it sure seems unlikely given their advanced years. So let me ask you, how good are you at waiting? I mean, this was 10 years since God promised to make a great nation out of them. 10 years since God promised to give them a son. You know, it's a funny thing about waiting and patience. Because when we get impatient, what we're saying is that our agenda is more important than whoever's agenda it is that we're waiting on. They should respond to me. They should arrange their life and schedule around what I think is important. But I want us to note this. God is far more concerned with what we become while we're waiting than what it is we're waiting for. God is far more concerned with building patience, perseverance, trust, faith, faithfulness in us than what it is we're waiting for. Reminds me of Hebrews chapter 6 and verse 12, where he warns us not to be sluggish in our faith, but to imitate those through, here's the key phrase, through faith and patience, inherit the kingdom, inherit the promises. There's something about the discipline of delay that God is building into us character and faith and trust. You see, to wait for God is to trust his wisdom and his timing. And so we can say with confidence, God is never late. He's always on time. Now, why would God have waited so long for Abraham and Sarah? Why would he have waited? He made the promise at 75. This is now 85. And do you know that the child isn't going to come until Abraham's 100 years old and his wife is 90? So even after this waiting time, they have 15 more years. Why would God wait so long? Hebrews 11 gives us an interesting clue. Chapter 11 and verse 12. Speaking about Abraham, therefore from one man, and him as good as dead, were born as many as the stars of the sky in multitude, innumerable as the sand from the seashore. God wanted to make sure Abraham was physically beyond any realm of considering the possibility they could have a child. Why would he wait so long? So that when God did act, it was clearly God that did it. There wasn't 1 second of time that Abraham could claim credit or that his wife Sarah could claim credit for that child coming along. So we can say it like this. In some ways, it's not us waiting on God, It's God waiting on us. In some ways, God's waiting on us to become the kind of faithful people that He can entrust. He's waiting on us for a little more time to see if there's trust and confidence and patience that's going to come. The waiting for Abraham was intended to deepen his faith so that his faith was and his confidence were in the giver more than the gift. God is far more concerned with what we become while we're waiting than what it is we're waiting for. I wonder if in your waiting and you're getting frustrated and impatient and you're begging God or pleading with God, or maybe you just gave up on God because you've prayed and nothing happened. What if God's been waiting for you to become the right kind of person? What if He wants you to be the right person that He can entrust with more responsibility? The right kind of person that He can entrust. I've prayed that way for our church over the years. God, make me the kind of pastor that you can entrust with more opportunities and more responsibility. God, make us the kind of church that you can trust with more opportunities. May we become, while we're waiting, the kind of people that He wants us to become. God waiting. Well, Abraham and Sarah aren't so good at waiting. Do you get antsy at the red light when the car in front of you is going straight and you want to turn right on red? Do you get antsy? Look at verse 2. Sarah says to Abram, "See now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go into my maid, and perhaps I shall obtain children by her." And Abram heeded the voice of Sarah. Then Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. So he went into Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. When we're not good at waiting, we have to become good at scheming. Because when things don't work out the way we want, and they don't work out in the time frame that we want, then we have to start scheming. Another word for that is manipulating. So we're manipulating people, we're manipulating circumstances, and we're busy working the scene, we're working it. And so Sarah decides, God's late, He's not come around, He's not delivered. I'm going to have to become God's little helper here. And so she says, well, here's my handmaid Hagar, the Egyptian. And in that day, in that culture, if the wife was unable to have children, then she could offer her maid to the patriarch of the family. The same thing happens a couple generations later when Jacob marries Rachel, and he marries Leah. And their children, there were handmaids involved in that as well. Impatience causes us to seek right results through wrong means. Was it right that they have a son? Absolutely. Was it right that a child comes into their life? Absolutely. That was God's plan. But what happened was they said, we're going to have to do it our way. God has dropped the ball. God isn't quite up to the task. God's timing isn't working out for us. We're going to have to do something about it. Doesn't God want me to be happy? How many parades of chaos have people had to endure because they said, God wants me to be happy, and so they decide to seek some result they think is good through wrong means, through self-absorbed means, through sinful means. How much sin has been committed because there's been some attempt to get some good result? How much unhappiness has been caused by the pursuit of happiness? How much brokenness has been caused? Well, I couldn't help it. What else was I going to do? That was all the choice I had. God wants me to be happy, doesn't He? So they think they need to be God's little helper here. Something else to note, impatience causes us to look for others to blame. Look at verse 2 more carefully, if you would, please. Who did Sarah blame for their lack of a son? Whose fault is this? The Lord has restrained me. God's actually preventing this from happening. I know it's God's plan and all, but he's preventing it. That's what she's saying. And then a couple verses later, we hadn't got to verse 5. Sarah says to Abram, my wrong be on you. After the handmaid Hagar becomes pregnant, there's all this conflict in the home. And she puts it on Abraham like it's his fault. Go back to Genesis, the first sin. Adam, what's up with the sin? Oh, it was the woman you gave me, Lord. And here Sarah is looking for somebody to blame. Impatience causes us to look for shortcuts. Sarah says, here's a shortcut. Here's my handmaid Hagar. When sex gets ahead of marriage for the sake of intimacy, we're looking for shortcuts to intimacy. When gambling gets ahead of hard work, we're looking for shortcuts to building wealth. Pornography is a shortcut to intimacy. Now, I'm glad for shortcuts on my phone, right? GPS tells you how to get there. I'm glad for those kinds of shortcuts. But there's a lot of shortcuts to take us down paths we didn't intend to go. And there's a lot of shortcuts that keep us longer than we wanted to stay and cost us more than we wanted to pay. Take us a lot further than we wanted to go. Genesis chapter 3, that temptation of Adam and Eve. Do you know that temptation was a temptation to a shortcut? It's Genesis chapter 3 and verse 4. In verse 4 it says, the serpent said to the woman, you will not die. And then verse 5 goes on to say, God knows that in the day you eat this fruit, that your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now, God put Adam and Eve in the garden, and he said, you can eat of any tree of the garden except this one over here. And he created them there in the garden in a state of innocence. And every day they said no to the one tree and yes to all other good choices. They would grow and slowly mature in their knowledge of good and evil. It would grow over time. But Satan promised them a shortcut. You can become like God. You can know good and evil. God's holding out on you. The good stuff is right around the corner. You just need to take this little bit of a detour. And you can find the good stuff. It's all going to be right there. God's holding out. The temptation of Jesus, we'll fast forward some centuries. It's in Matthew chapter 4. And Satan tempted Jesus 3 times. It's in Matthew 4 and verse 1. Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Verse 2 goes on. And when he had fasted 40 days and nights, afterward he's hungry. And then look at this next verse, the temptation that comes. The tempter came to him and he said, if you're really the Son of God, command these stones to become bread. Was there anything wrong with Jesus making bread? No. In fact, some months later, he would feed 5,000 people by some miracle of the bread. The temptation here was to take a shortcut and use that for himself and his own benefit. The third temptation is also interesting. It's in verse 8. The devil again takes Jesus up on a high mountain and shows him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And Satan says to Jesus, verse 9, all these things I will give you if you will fall down and worship me. Now, Satan had some delegated power to be able to make that offer. One day, Christ will inherit the kingdoms of the world. What did Christ have to go through between that temptation and his inheriting the kingdoms of the world? The crucifixion. Satan's temptation was actually a shortcut to avoid the pain. If you just work with me here on this, Jesus, you can avoid the pain and the difficulty and the hardship. Temptation does that to us. If you just sell your soul to the devil, here's a shortcut to get what you want. Jesus, isn't that what you really want? Here's the big payoff. Don't you think God the Father wants you to be happy? Don't you think He wants you to have all these kingdoms of the world? It says something about the discipline of delay. This is some good wisdom for parents. Teaching their children character building. Consider as you work with them, teaching the discipline of delay. Just because you can give them something doesn't mean that you should. Because if they get everything they want on demand, then there's no discipline of delay that occurs in their life. Because for kids, from their parents, what they become while they're waiting is far more important than what it is they're waiting for. And we think about, well, what they're waiting for is not that big a deal. I could just give it to them. I could give it to them today. And how many parents will say, well, we just can't afford it. And maybe you can, maybe you can't. How much better to just say, you don't need that now. Let's plan ahead. Let's save for that. Let's wait for that until this age, this time period. Because what that child becomes while they're waiting is way bigger deal than what it is they're waiting for. Well, Abraham and Sarah moved from scheming, because any manipulation, if you're not good at waiting, patience, you're going to move to scheming. And scheming and manipulating will always lead to the next one, which is fighting. Fighting. Abram takes Hagar as his second wife, legal according to the custom and culture. So a couple of notes about this. Just because it's legal doesn't make it wise or God approved. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 12 is fascinating to me, because it says, all things are lawful for me. I'm capable of doing most anything, but not everything's beneficial or helpful or wise. So let's look closely here. Well, read 7 and 8 with 5 and 6, verse 5. Sarah says to Abram, my wrong be upon you. I gave my maid into your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between you and me. So Abram said to Sarah, indeed, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as you please. And when Sarah dealt harshly with her, she fled from her presence. So now we're fighting. They're feuding. If we look closely, here we see Sarah and her fighting, because she blames God in verse 2. Then she blames Abraham in verse 5. Mistreats the servant. Abraham abdicates his authority and leadership in the home. That line in verse 6 is tragic. She's your problem. You do something about it. You worry about it. You take care of it. It's your problem. I don't know how many times in a marriage counseling situation, marriage conflict, one spouse will say to the other spouse, hey, I think we could upgrade things here a little bit. I think we could use a little tune-up. I could use a little help. And the other one will say, well, if you got a problem, you go get it fixed. And in a marriage, there's no such thing as you have a problem. There's we have a problem. But Abraham doesn't do that. He abdicates his authority. One more note here. I said just because it was legal to do didn't make it wise. One more note. Hagar became pregnant. And it would be possible for some reading this story to say, well, that worked out. I guess it works. In fact, we have a saying, it's pretty common around here, right, in our world, whatever works. Hey, if it works. And we kind of evaluate right and wrong by whatever works. How about we evaluate right and wrong by what God's will is stated in Scripture? How about we evaluate right and wrong by what God says is right, not by what works or doesn't work? Have you ever seen pictures? They're usually drawn pictures, two of the same exact picture on each side, and then it'll say, what's different about these photos, or pictures, the graphics? Or what's missing in this picture that's not in this one? Well, if we look at Genesis 16, there's something missing that's been in previous stories that we've learned about Abraham. And that's the altar. Abraham was often arriving at a spot, he'd build an altar. The previous chapter, there was an altar there. There's no altar here. There's no conversation with God. There's no meeting with God. There's no arranging things with God. Hagar runs. And we find Hagar submitting here. Verse 7. The angel of the Lord found Hagar by a spring of water because she fled. And God said to Hagar, Hagar, Sarah's maid, where have you come from and where are you going? And she said, I'm fleeing from the presence of my mistress. And the angel of the Lord said to her, verse 9, return to your mistress, submit yourself under her hand. The angel of the Lord said to her, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly so that they shall not be counted for multitude. The angel of the Lord said, behold, you're with a child. You'll bear a son. You shall call him Ishmael. He'll be a wild man, verse 12. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he'll dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Verse 13, she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, you are the God who sees. The Hebrew word is El Roi. For she said, have I also seen him who sees me? I'll pause there. This account of Hagar here is very endearing to me. This woman's from Egypt, so she has no family, she has no context, she has no support. And then she gets rejected from the only people that know her or care about her, which is Abraham and Sarah. I don't know if she was Sarah's only handmaid, Sarah's favorite handmaid. Maybe she was Sarah's least favorite one. You go marry the old guy. I don't know. She runs. And the angel of the Lord shows up. The angel of the Lord in the Old Testament is the pre-existent, pre-incarnate Christ. God finds her. I love that. Here's this woman in despair and loneliness and guilt and shame and fear, and God finds her. And he says, I have a future for you. You're going to name your child Ishmael, and Ishmael means God hears. And then she says, I have seen the God who sees me. I'm not forgotten. God saw me. God found me. God came to me. So God provides attention to her. He calls her by name and he sees her and he hears her. And then he provides counsel to her and he tells her to go back to Sarah. Submit, make things right. Go back to the place where you live and belong. But God gives her hope. He gives her a future. Here's what's next. You're going to have a son. His name's going to be Ishmael. And every time you call his name, it's going to remind you that God heard your pleas and God heard your prayers. Ishmael, by the way, is the ancestor of the Arab peoples. Even in the Quran, Muhammad traces their lineage back to Ishmael. It's the main reason why the Arabs claim the Holy Land as theirs, because Ishmael was the firstborn son to Abraham. was not the child of promise, but he was the firstborn son there. So we have this unmarried or sort of married, second choice slave mother from Egypt, out in the middle of nowhere, isolated and forgotten, feeling abandoned. And God comes to her and says, I have a plan for you. You're not forgotten. You're not hidden. I hear you and I see you. Now, Abraham and Sarah grew impatient. They took the back roads. They ended up with a whole parade of calamity. May we be faithful in staying on the path that God has for us and trusting His timing and His wisdom. And then for those that find themselves in the situation that Hagar's in, oh, please know God sees you and He hears you. You're not hidden. You're not forgotten. His plan is still at work in your life. Would you stand with me, please? Our worship team's going to come. But I would, as I speak to everyone today, if you'd bow your heads and close your eyes, as I speak to everyone, but there's two kinds of people in particular, those that are tempted to take shortcuts. May you see the need for God to work and God to be at work, the need to trust Him. And for those that feel abandoned and isolated and forgotten, you see the value that God places on you. He sees you. He hears you. Your cries of despair are heard. Father in heaven, there's some hurting people here that felt very alone, whether it's the shame or guilt or fear, the isolation, what they've done or what's been done to them. Thank you that you're the God who sees, and I pray that many here today would see the God who sees. And then for those of us that are so tempted on shortcuts, how I pray that we would persist in faith. We would understand the discipline of delay that you want to build into us. Character and faithfulness. Thank you in Jesus'